Hi everyone, welcome to video 4 of our Pump 101 video series. My name is Emily. I'm one of the diabetes educators at Children's Minnesota, and I'm here walking you through our Intro to Pump Therapy. At this point, you should have watched videos 1, 2, and 3, and we are now on video 4 of Pump 101. Video 4 is all about insulin dosing while utilizing insulin pump therapy. It's important that we discuss this now because, as we discussed before, once on an insulin pump, we will expect you to make dose changes at home. And so we need to have a basic understanding of the different components of the doses in a pump so that we feel confident and prepared to make those changes down the road once we have started an insulin pump. This is our basic disclaimers. You can review as needed in the future or press pause. Okay, our pump settings. One of our first things that we set in the pump is our basal rate. Our basal rate is replacing our daily basal injection. This image is showing that basal rate in the red line going horizontally, and it's showing that we're getting a little bit continuously throughout the day and night. Our basal rate is acting as a doorstop to prop open the cell doors so that glucose from the liver and muscles can get inside the cells 24/7 in the background. On our pump, our basal rate is programmed as an hourly rate in units per hour. Now, how do we calculate this? It's actually easier than you'd think. You can take your current dose of your daily basal insulin and divide this by 24. You're simply dividing it by 24 hours of the day. So, for example, if you are currently taking 9 units of Lantus, Basaglar, Semglee, whatever you take, you can do 9 divided by 24. This comes to 0.375 units per hour. The hourly rate can vary based on time of day. Some people find that they need less basal overnight or more basal overnight. And so what is nice is on the pump, you can customize that versus being stuck with the one dose that you administer a day with an injection. A couple features with basal rates that you can use on pumps. One is a temporary basal rate. A temporary basal rate will temporarily increase or decrease your set basal rate, and this is used so you can accommodate increased or decreased insulin needs. This might be when you're sick, when you're more active, when you're stressed, if you have taken a steroid pack for an infection, that type of thing. The temp basal rates are calculated in percentages of your current basal rate setting, and then you set it for a set amount of time. So for example, you could set a temporary basal rate of 120% for 12 hours while ill. That way you're getting more insulin in the background to try to proactively prevent the hyperglycemia that results from the insulin resistance that we have when we're sick. Another example is we could run a temporary basal rate of 50% for 3 hours during a soccer game. And this is so that there's less background insulin in the body to help prevent lows while we're more active. Temp basal rates are not available on hybrid closed loop systems. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail. And this is because in the hybrid closed loop systems, they do have different settings where you can change your target and effectively or essentially becomes a temp basal rate. Another setting is your max basal rate. This is a safety feature just to make sure that when you're setting a temporary basal rate, you don't accidentally increase too much. Our typical recommendation is just double your current basal rate. Okay, moving on. A very large component of our pump is our Bolus calculator. We use our Bolus calculator to calculate our insulin dose every time we eat or need to take a blood sugar correction. We can use this to calculate a very precise dose. What is nice is the pumps can deliver down to a 1/10 or 100th of a unit. So you can get exactly the amount of insulin you need versus being constricted to the half unit dosing of an insulin pen. There are 6 components of our Bolus calculator that we're going to discuss. And the 6 components are your insulin to carb ratio, your insulin sensitivity factor, your blood glucose correction threshold, target blood glucose, your insulin action time, and your max bolus. This is a little image that breaks down how a pump may calculate a bolus. I'm going to end with this image. You're going to understand it a lot more at the end of this. So let's dive into that first component of the bolus calculator, the insulin to carb ratio, or your ICR. Your ICR is the amount of insulin that you need to cover carbohydrates when you're eating carbohydrates, so at meals and snacks. In a pump, it is programmed in whole unit ratios as 1 unit per X grams of carbs. So this gets confusing for people who dose in half units because you do have to do a conversion when starting pump therapy. So for example, if your current carb ratio is a half unit per 15 grams, in the pump, you'd program it as 1 unit per 30 grams. The ratio itself is the same. You get the same amount of insulin. It's just a different way of programming or a different way of looking at that ratio. And as I had said before, it does deliver down to 1/100th of a unit on most of the pumps. And so when you are converting from your half unit to your whole unit, it can feel scary making such a big seemingly change, but it's not a change. But just know that even though the ratio looks different, you're still calculating down to a precise number. You can also program different carb ratios throughout the day. You are probably already familiar with this if you are delving into pump therapy. Many people have different carb ratios for different time of day. And so instead of keeping this in your head, the pump can keep track of that. Next up is our insulin sensitivity factor, or our ISF. Our ISF is how much 1 unit of insulin will lower the blood glucose level. It's essentially saying, how sensitive are you to insulin? In the pump, this is programmed in a whole unit ratio. So you program it as 1 unit per X milligrams per deciliter. So for example, if your correction scale is 1 unit for every 60 points over 160, your insulin sensitivity factor would be 60, because we expect your blood sugar to drop 60 points for every 1 unit of insulin you receive. Now, same thing with the carb ratios. If you are currently using a half unit correction scale, we will need to convert that from a half unit scale to a whole unit scale. So for example, if your correction scale is a half unit for every 40 points over 150, your insulin sensitivity factor is 80. So a half unit for every 40 points, 1 unit for every 80 points. Same ratio, just a different way of looking at it. You can also program different ISFs by time of day. A lot of people find they're more sensitive or more resistant to insulin daytime versus nighttime. So again, you can program it by time of day so that you don't have to think about it. The pump is keeping track. So let's throw a couple of examples on how to figure out our ISF, because this is a confusing concept. So let's say this is what your blood sugar correction scale looks like. So you're getting 1 unit for every 50 points over 150. Here we're expecting the blood sugar to drop 50 points for every 1 unit of insulin that you get. That's why there's a 50-point range and 1 unit. And then each 50-point range, you add an additional unit. So for this scale, your ISF is 50. Let's look at a half unit scale. So this scale is a half unit for every 50 points over 150. And so for this one, if a half unit is expected to drop the blood sugar 50 points, then a whole unit is expected to drop the blood sugar 100 points. In this scenario, your ISF is 100. Let's move on. So another piece of our Bolus calculator is our correction threshold and our target blood sugar. Your correction threshold is at what blood sugar we start giving correction insulin for. Your target blood sugar is what blood sugar we're targeting when we give a correction. What's the goal that we are trying to achieve? In the pump, you can program a single target or a target range. It does depend on which pump brand you're using, so we'll help you get that figured out when you start your pump. Let's look at another example. So here's that same scale, 1 unit for every 50 points over 150. Here, we are starting our blood sugar corrections for blood sugars over 150. Therefore, our correction threshold is 150. We see that 1 unit of insulin is supposed to drop our blood sugar 50 points. So at 150, if we get 1 unit of insulin, our expected blood sugar is 100. We expect you to drop 50 points. So with this correction scale, the target blood glucose is 100. Our next part of the bolus calculator is your insulin action time, or IAT, and your max bolus. These are the final 2 features. Your insulin action time is simply how long insulin stays active in the body. And I think everybody can probably guess this, but we're going to throw in our 3-hour rule. So as you're familiar, our 3-hour rule is insulin stays active in the body for 3 hours. Therefore, we do not recommend giving a blood sugar correction if you've given rapid-acting insulin in the previous 3 hours. What's nice on a pump is we program this insulin action time so that if you do want to give a correction bolus early within those 3 hours, it is keeping track of how much insulin is still on board. It's still active in your body, and it will subtract that from your blood sugar correction so that you don't get overcorrected. So it's a pretty cool feature. And then the final piece is our max bolus. This is a safety feature as well, just to make sure we don't accidentally overbolus. Sometimes we will swap our blood sugar and carbs in the dose calculator, and you'll get a wonky dose recommendation. So this is a safety feature to safeguard against that. Now let's pull all 6 of those factors together. And oops, sorry, that is based on your patient preference and based on your history. So when you're setting up your pump, you'll say, what's the most insulin I've ever given at one time? 16 units. You might program it in your pump as 20 units. Okay, now let's pull them all together. So this is what a dose calculator may look like. It's one brand, all of them look a little different, but the components are pretty much the same. So this is showing us that the person inputted their blood sugar at 200 and that they're eating 60 grams of carbs. At the bottom, the pump is recommending 7.3 units of insulin. Now, how did it get there? Well, this first part of the blood sugar 200, it's recommending 2 units. It's using your correction threshold, your target blood sugar, and your insulin sensitivity factor. So essentially, it's looking at all components of your correction scale to determine that you need 2 units. Then it's looking at your insulin action time. So they're saying, you know what, you gave a bolus recently and you still have 0.7 units on board. So it is subtracting 0.7 units from your total bolus. Then it's using the insulin to carb ratio to calculate how much insulin you need for those 60 grams of carbohydrates. So that comes out to 6 units. And then the final piece is this max bolus. After doing its calculation, it's saying you need 7.3 units. Let's say this person's max bolus was programmed at 5 units. At this stage, the pump would alert you and say, hey, that's more than your max bolus. Are you sure? And it's just that second question to make sure you're not accidentally overbolusing. Okay, a note about our pump settings. The dose calculator is only going to work as good as your settings are. And what that means is we need to be fine-tuning our doses frequently. If we don't update them, then the bolus calculator isn't going to work because we're not using what our body currently needs. So a lot of times when we start insulin pump therapy or we're thinking about it, we think that the pump is going to be our fairy godmother and just make diabetes so easy, and it totally takes it away. And I'm sorry to tell you, but that's not true. Pumps still take human effort. You still need to tell the pump what you're doing. It doesn't know what you're doing. So you still need to be doing things, and you need to be telling the pump your blood sugars and your carbs. Otherwise, it's going to give wrong amounts of insulin. So it is very important to frequently assess your doses, make changes as needed in your pump settings. Now, I do want to touch on hybrid closed loop therapy versus closed loop artificial pancreas. So a lot of the pumps on the market nowadays do offer hybrid closed loop therapy. I'm going to get into that a bit on the next page. And you will see in marketing that they're listed as artificial pancreases or closed loop systems. They are not artificial pancreases or closed loop systems. A full artificial pancreas would be able to give insulin and glucagon to manage blood sugars and keep you stable. And you also would not have to tell it when you're eating. It would just be fully automated, and we are not there yet. And so I just want to make sure you are aware of that. It's not fully automated. There is, again, still human effort. So let's talk about hybrid closed loop therapy. This is what is available. So in hybrid closed loop therapy, the pump is looking at sensor values and your trend arrow to automatically increase and decrease your basal rate in real time. And this helps improve your time in range and helps prevent hypoglycemia. So this image is showing those little dots are your blood sugars every 5 minutes on your CGM, and then it's showing a red bar in the middle. The red bar in the middle is when this pump chose to suspend the basal rate automatically because this person was trending down and they were in danger of going low. The dotted circles that then cross that bottom line, that is showing if insulin had continued to be given, that person's blood sugar likely would have crossed that low threshold. However, since that insulin was suspended, the dark gray circles evened out and started to rise. And so this prevented the patient from having a low blood sugar. So this is an example kind of your basic hybrid closed loop therapy. This is called suspend before low. Now, each pump also offers an algorithm that will increase insulin in addition to suspending it. And each algorithm works vastly different from the other. So in the All About videos, you're going to learn about those algorithms, and I highly recommend that you do watch all three, even if you think you know what pump you want, because each algorithm is different. And if you are jumping into hybrid closed loop therapy, it is your responsibility as a user to know how the system works. And so I do want you to really think about it and look at the different systems to make an educated decision for yourself. So as I was saying, hybrid closed loop still requires human effort. It's not doing everything for you. Hybrid closed loop is a tool. It's not a fix. The algorithm only works when we're giving it information, which is bolus, bolus, bolus. You need to give it your carb count and your blood sugar. Otherwise, it's just going to go haywire in the background. The algorithms work in a very A plus B equals C way. And so it's simply going based off of the data that you're giving it. So if it's seeing blood sugar is rising, all it says is more insulin. And it doesn't know if you skipped your bolus or if you didn't pre-bolus for a meal. And so it can kind of cause this yo-yo effect of your blood sugar is rising, it gives more insulin, so then you start falling, and then it suspends your insulin, and then you kind of go up and down. So you really need to give the system what it needs to know what to do. Again, this is not an artificial pancreas. This is simply hybrid closed loop therapy. And with hybrid closed loop therapy, really the two main behaviors that you can do to have success on the system is pre-bolusing and accurate, precise carb counts. If you're not actively doing this already, then I would not recommend starting on hybrid closed loop therapy. Instead, I would start on a more basic system, work on your pre-bolusing and carb counts, and then upgrade to the hybrid closed loop smart system. Okay. Sorry to end on a downer, but that is the end of video 4, our insulin pump settings. I will see you on the other side in video 5. Thank you. Bye.